Number 1.
John Wagner, age 16, went missing from Monroe City, Missouri on February 17, 1968. He was last seen by family when he dropped his younger brother, Mark, off at a school dance. He never returned to pick up his brother afterwards. His truck, with his keys, coat and gloves inside, was found in an alley off of Main Street in Monroe City. An older article adds another detail, that he was last seen at an ice cream store. I do think this is correct, as this was from an article that was published right after it happened. There have been a lot of rumors pertaining to John's disappearance, and the word on the street has always been that John was involved in an altercation with one or two young men that night over one of their girlfriends being interested in John. 2 male persons of interest were given polygraphs immediately following John's disappearance, but the results were not announced. Monroe City is a very small town, and after looking at it through Google Street View and Google Earth, it doesn't appear to have changed much since 1968. The buildings on Main Street appear to be from the 1960s or earlier, and I don't see any other major commercial areas. My guess is that the ice cream store was on Main Street, and it was probably one of the only hangouts for teens. After dropping his brother off at the dance, both the junior high and high school were a very short distance from Main Street. John likely stopped there, and I believe he parked the truck in the alley himself. There is no ice cream store there now, that I can see, but there are only 2 alleys that I can find off of Main Street. One is next to what is now Peggy Sue's Diner, the other is toward the other end of Main Street, next to the building that now has a sign that reads Lake Gazette Classifieds. The police have recently started looking into John's disappearance again and have attempted to talk to the individuals who were believed to have been responsible for his disappearance. Nearly a half-century later, they still refuse to talk. Like the investigator is quoted as saying in the article, that itself is very telling. One of the more recent articles on John's case describes the rumor of his disappearance in enough detail, even specifying that he fell back and hit his head, that I believe there are eyewitness accounts. Someone, if not several people, saw it happen. I think it was more than rumor, especially with the refusal of both men to cooperate. Is that not enough to bring charges? John's sister believes that this altercation occurred and that nobody was meant to be killed, but that the persons involved panicked and hid his body. She stated that she does not want to prosecute anyone, she just wants to know what happened to her brother and where he is so she can give him a proper burial. These men would be in their 60s now and have had their whole lives to live out, while John did not. They probably have children and grandchildren now, and it disgusts me that they still refuse to talk, especially if it was an accident. What is wrong with people? I really hope that they are able to bring charges, it sounds to me like they have enough. Even if the case were not successfully prosecuted, I still think it would be worth it. If the men involved refuse to talk now, there is really nothing to lose, short of a possible deathbed confession. My guess is that one of them would talk if charges were brought, and if it was indeed an accident, whoever talks first could be let go with probation or something. It might be the only way to get answers, which John's family deserves.
Number 2.
Dannette and Jeannette Millbrook, age 15, are 2 fraternal twins who went missing from Augusta, Georgia on March 18, 1990. They were apparently heading home to their apartment on foot when they disappeared. It has been stated that both girls had stopped at a pump and shop gas station convenience store where they purchased chips and a drink. According to some sources, this was the last sighting of them. What their actual plans were that day might help to determine what may have actually transpired, but the reports are confusing. One article states that they went to a relative's house and got money to take the bus to and from school, then stopped at a friend's house, and then walked to the convenience store and disappeared. A store clerk recalled the twins leaving the store at about 4:30 p.m. and said they looked fine. The clerk had apparently been busy at the cash register, but vaguely noticed a vehicle parked outside. The clerk did not see whether the girls had gotten into the car or which way they might have headed. Other reports suggest that the twins may have gone to their friend's house after going to the convenience store and further imply that law enforcement was unaware that they had actually made it to their friend's house until later in the investigation. Shortly after the twins disappeared, there had been an unconfirmed sighting of them in a white truck and a curious statement made by the lead investigator on the case. He said that one of the twins had gotten pregnant and that both twins had run away as a result. The investigator never provided any evidence of this and never indicated that he'd actually made contact with the twins. It sounded like a rumor. Just over a year after their disappearance, someone in the police department closed their missing persons case and removed them from the national database. The twins' family was never told about this, and no trail was left as to who had taken this action or why. Over the next several years, the Millbrooks' attempts to check on the status of their case were ignored, and it wasn't until their younger sister started badgering them incessantly that a sheriff finally agreed to look into it and discovered that the case had been closed since 1991. Jeannette and Dannette were described as homebodies by a cousin. They rarely went out anywhere and were not in any sort of trouble or living a high-risk lifestyle. The twins' younger sister recalls begging to go with them that day and being told no. She has stated that she wishes she had gone with them that day, in spite of the idea that she might have been taken too. How do two 15-year-old girls just disappear at the same time? From the convenience store to their home was a little less than a mile. Most of that route would have been on MLK Boulevard, which was a busy thoroughfare. It would still have been light out at the time they disappeared. I can't see a random abductor being able to control two teenage girls. It seems to me that they had to have gotten into a vehicle with someone they know or someone in authority. This was the second half of March, so it shouldn't have been particularly cold. Being that it was less than a mile home, it seems unlikely that they would have needed or wanted a ride. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was common, but by 1990 it was very rare and most people were well aware of the dangers involved with it. I think it's unlikely that they hitchhiked or accepted a ride from a stranger. I hope these girls are found soon and hopefully alive and well.
Number 3.
Tinze Lucinda Huels, age 17, went missing from Tampa, Florida on October 27, 1984. Sometimes her name is spelled Tinze on websites. Many accounts state that Lucinda was last seen leaving her home on the way to the laundromat with clothing to wash. It is likely that this was when she was last seen by her family. She never returned home and she was never heard from again by her family. Her vehicle was found later that night in the parking lot of the Char Pal, a bar at 3711 E Bush Avenue in Tampa. The clothing she had taken to wash was found neatly folded in the car. Investigators learned that Lucinda had gone to the home of a female friend at some point that evening and the two of them, along with another friend, had been at the Char Pal having drinks. According to one of her friends, Lucinda had been talking to a male there by the name of Larry Moore, who reportedly owned a sign-making and cleaning business and had offered her a job. She was supposed to start work on October 29. Her friends left the bar, supposedly leaving her there with Larry Moore. Larry Moore and another individual were stopped by police later that night and charged with possession of marijuana and a concealed weapon. Lucinda had not yet been reported missing at this point. He was questioned later and denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. The Char Pal bar is known for organized crime activity and was briefly featured in the movie Goodfellas. 2 weeks after her disappearance, her purse was found in the Busch Garden Zoo campground in the men's bathroom. It contained money, her driver's license, and her marriage certificate. Lucinda left behind 2 young children and had been planning a birthday party for her son when she disappeared. Initially, Lucinda was believed to be a victim of serial killer Bobby Joe Long, who happened to be on a murder spree in Florida during much of 1984. He confessed to many murders, but always denied involvement in Lucinda's disappearance. In 1992, Lucinda's daughter received a call from a woman claiming to be Lucinda. She explained that she had run away from the responsibilities of being a wife and young mother and said she had been working in Memphis under the name Amanda. The woman seemed to know a lot of details about their family and she was invited to come back home. While much of the family was suspicious of this woman, she bore a striking resemblance to Lucinda and even had a similar birthmark on her leg. When showed photo albums, this woman appeared to recognize people and places. She lived with Lucinda's family for quite some time. This woman ultimately turned out not to be Lucinda, but a woman whose name really was Amanda, and she was a runaway from Arkansas. Blood samples were taken to confirm this. Keeping in mind that this all occurred well before information could be easily obtained on the internet, it is perplexing how Amanda knew so much about Lucinda's family. Could she and Lucinda have met at some point between her disappearance and Amanda's reappearance? Lucinda's family never received answers to this question, as Amanda was whisked away rather quickly once the hoax was confirmed. Is it possible that Amanda actually knew something about what had happened to Lucinda 8 years before? You would think that in order to pull off such a stunt, she would have to have known that A. Lucinda's husband hadn't killed her, and B. that Lucinda was not going to reappear. How could she have known these things? There were some curious things stated about Lucinda's disappearance. According to an essay written by Lucinda's son, the husband of one of the friends Lucinda was in the bar with had recently flashed a gun and made threats at his apartment, although Lucinda had not witnessed it. Additionally, during the time when Lucinda's children were about to submit blood samples to prove whether this woman was actually Lucinda, there were some bizarre occurrences. Amanda had reportedly been run off the road, causing her car to flip into a creek bed, resulting in minor injuries. Lucinda's family had been victims of vandalism, including the spray painting of Strike 1 and Strike 2 on their property, and tires slashed on their vehicles. This stopped once Amanda was gone. It's been theorized that Amanda may have vandalized the property to keep the children from submitting blood samples, thus outing her. Lucinda's children have pondered the idea that perhaps Amanda really was Lucinda and that she'd been put back into witness protection as a result of the threats. Although I haven't seen it mentioned, there is a third possibility that whoever committed the vandalism thought Amanda was Lucinda and was attempting to keep her quiet about something. Lucinda's husband has now passed away and her children continue to search for her. I hope sometime soon the real Lucinda will be found.
Number 4.
Stevie Bates, age 19, was last seen in Manhattan, New York on April 28, 2012. It is rare for me to profile cases that are this recent. Most of my cases are from the early 1990s or earlier. The reason for this is that most of the recent cases have plenty of publicity and investigation going on. Unless you've had the misfortune of going missing from New York City. As seen in my articles about the disappearances of Tyus Jackson, Sylvia Lwoski, and poor Lois Darnapic, NYPD said they didn't have the resources to even be the contact agency for tips. There is a pattern here. Stevie was a student at Hunter College in 2011. For a school assignment, she began attending the Occupy Wall Street protests and became personally caught up in it, eventually becoming part of the tent city that was erected by protesters. Occupy Wall Street was raided and taken down in November 2011. Although Stevie did not have a known drug problem, her boyfriend, Brandon Klosterman, was a user, and Stevie had several friends who were drug users, many of whom she'd gotten to know through Occupy Wall Street. In early 2012, Stevie accompanied some of the friends she'd made at Occupy Wall Street on a cross-country road trip. She reportedly had just broken up with Brandon at this time. The car they were traveling in broke down, and Stevie had lost her cell phone. She decided to take a bus back home instead of continuing on the trip. She called her mother from a borrowed cell phone on April 27, 2012. She was at a bus station in Pennsylvania on her last layover before getting onto a bus to New York City. She told her mother that she was going to stop to pick up her belongings at Brandon's place in Brooklyn. Once she arrived, then she would be headed to her parents' home in Yonkers. Surveillance footage on April 28, 2012 shows the last known sighting of Stevie. She can be seen at 110 coming up the escalator, appearing unsure which direction to go in. Then she is seen walking out of camera range. Stevie never came home and never contacted her family again. In the hours and days following Stevie's disappearance, her mother had a great deal of difficulty getting any law enforcement agency to take a report. Each agency would refer her elsewhere. She eventually filed a report in Yonkers, which is not particularly near where Stevie was last seen. The amount of time it took for someone to finally take the report and the fact that it was not ultimately taken in the place Stevie was last seen undoubtedly hurt the chances of finding her quickly. Opportunities to examine other surveillance footage were missed, and public transportation drivers that may have taken her from Manhattan to Brooklyn were not questioned. Brandon is said to have lived as a squatter in a vacant building in Brooklyn at the time of Stevie's disappearance. Although there are no details of his living arrangements, Stevie herself posted this on Facebook, and I am assuming she is referring to Brandon's place. If I am correct, then there are likely several people who know whether or not Stevie ever made it to Brooklyn that day to pick up her belongings. When questioned, Brandon said he hadn't seen her since before she'd left on her road trip. He then deleted all his Facebook communications with Stevie and disappeared himself for a time. He turned up in Ohio when he was arrested on an unrelated charge. His roommates were probably still there in the days and weeks following her disappearance. Were they ever asked if they had seen her? Were the belongings she had gone there to retrieve still there? What about the bag that she appears to be carrying at the bus station? Did it somehow get there? I honestly don't know if these people were ever questioned or the place searched. My guess is no, as they were too busy giving Stevie's mother the runaround to actually go look. But still, lots of people had to have seen Stevie. The other people who got off the same bus she did. Maybe she chatted with some of them during the bus ride. Maybe they walked out of the bus station at the same time she did and saw her get into a cab. She most likely stopped somewhere in New York to eat something. Once Stevie was reported missing and flyers were distributed, one person did remember Stevie, although he'd seen her prior to her disappearance. He not only remembered her, but he had happened to capture her on video, riding on the train. This footage was believed to have been filmed on April 11. It is not known for sure if the man sitting next to her is Brandon. I hope Stevie will be found soon. She is severely missed by her family and friends. If you remember seeing Stevie after April 27 or recall anything unusual, possibly near the area of E26th and Curtelue in Brooklyn, please contact Yonkers police or Stevie's family through their Facebook page. That is the only Brooklyn location listed on the flyer's places to search list, so I'm guessing Brandon was living near. That is the only Brooklyn location listed on the flyer's places to search list, so I'm guessing Brandon was living near there.
Number 5.
Dorothy Jean Richardson, age 21, went missing from Abilene, Texas on June 30, 1981. There isn't much information available on her case, and I've been able to find very little to add. I don't see any media coverage, and as of this posting, DNA is not submitted. I could not find any information on her biological family other than that her maiden name is Howard. I think it's possible that she doesn't have any surviving family members. I can't see any evidence that anyone is looking for her, and the fact that DNA is not on file makes me wonder if she has any living family. All that is known is that she left the house on foot following an argument with her husband. She apparently had a car, but it was inoperable and it was left behind. She had married her husband in 1979 and he is now a registered sex offender and transient in Florida. I am not naming him here because he has not been named a suspect as far as I can see, and his current status doesn't necessarily mean anything. Her marriage record isn't difficult to find though. Sometimes in situations like this, I wonder if perhaps the person isn't actually missing. Maybe her husband reported her missing, and she did leave him and went back to her family, thus explaining why nobody seems to be looking for her. It's unlikely after all this time, but it has happened. There was a case several years ago of a college student who went missing. She'd left her apartment in Hawaii abruptly, leaving her belongings behind. It turned out that her landlord had reported her missing, but her family knew where she was all along. The missing person did not know she had been reported missing until she googled her name. Elizabeth Bishop went missing from Abilene, Texas about 3 months after Dorothy's disappearance. Henry Lee Lucas was suspected in Elizabeth's disappearance, though he denied involvement. I don't know that he was ever questioned about Dorothy. I wish there were more to say about Dorothy's case. I hope she is okay.